Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Byte-Sized HR powered by Luta One. I'm your host, Lloyd. Today, the topic, unveiling the truth, transforming the mirage of performance management into genuine employee engagement. To do so, our special guest of today, big thank you to you, Norma Herrington, Learning and Leadership Development Leader at Ascend People. First of all, let's start with the introduction.
Leaders and change makers. Today we dive into the traps of performance management systems. Tools that are often praised as essential for success, but criticized as corporate theater. Alarming statistics show a disconnect between intent and the actual impact, making this podcast a core, and we do hope, a way of rethinking these systems. We'll uncover why many organizations fail to make performance management meaningful and how these failures impact employee morale and business performance.
On that note, let's start off with the discrepancy between theory and practice. Digging a bit further, we start with a funnel approach with the first question research suggests that while companies routinely overhaul their performance management system, few manage to implement changes that genuinely enhance business outcome. Why do you think there is such a disparity between the intended and actual results of those reforms?
I think there's sometimes a hyper focus on the process side versus balancing both the process and people side of the equation of doing business. And I find that a lot of organizations spend time on building frameworks and processes and collecting data to hold employees accountable for their results and contributions, but they sometimes lack the ability to slow down, ask employees how these mechanisms really kind of enable their contribution, engagement, and success. Getting their side of the story is sometimes the missing equation. And for instance, I think a lot of organizations miss this aspect of it, is that they have an HRIM system in play. They collect data on the colleagues' experiences, their skills, their previous organizational abilities, and then they never use that narrative to enable growth within that current organization. They don't create mobility in the job responsibilities, or even if they have to downsize or lay off employees, they don't use that skill data that they've collected to maybe do role realignment for individuals. And I think sometimes that's a missed opportunity for a lot of organizations.
Perfect. Thank you very much. A very digestible and easy way of answering it. And it is. I mean, I have to add in regards to what you're mentioning, to a certain degree, it's almost common sense what you're
Yeah,
stating. And it's
absolutely.
it's 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 unfortunate that we have to remind these things, and that's still the data, which to our audience, we will, of course, link all the sources from where these questions are coming from in regards to why we're attaching them, right? But yeah, in regards to that note, let's look a bit more into the illusion of the alignment specifically, with the question being one of the critical failures of performance management is the misalignment with strategic business objective. Can you provide insight into why organizations struggle to link individual performance metric with broader business goals?
I've worked for nonprofits and for profits, and I worked at one Fortune 100 company that did this very well. In our organization within HR and learning and development, we were really skilled at promoting the idea of communication, and the organization as a whole did that well. And what they did was speak in terms of layman terms, like everyday language. They communicated what the broader goals of the organization were, and trickled it down throughout the organization. So everybody knew what their contributions were tied into the bigger picture. So they created space for leaders to define the goals as it applied to their division or functional group, as well as create space for employees to define how their goals can contribute to that. And what they always did very well, and I was kind of proud of being part of that equation, was they reported out quarterly in their scorecards. We had scorecards of how well we were working towards those goals and outcomes. So colleagues had a sense of forward movement. They had a connection to the performance. And I think a lot of organizations miss that alignment, is like actively communicating. Don't over communicate the complicated, but over communicate the clarity and the way they're moving forward as an organization and trying to drive outcomes.
Brilliant. And I feel like, yeah, the term over communication is something that we need to emphasize a bit more these days, because it's often looked at, it should be the opposite direction in regards to that, but it's not. It's wrong. There's nothing wrong with communicating too much. You're better off over communicating than under communicating, specifically in these aspects. Plus, when looking at business goals, which of course have value behind it, right? Well, on that note, and thank you very much, and I'm glad you also had the chance of being able to experience it firsthand on the successful project. So congrats on that one. To
For
see
sure.
that directly. It's good experience. I hope that you'll be able to implement that again in future experiences as well. But yeah, so when kind of digging now onto the challenge of engagement and fairness, which I think is a very important topic personally, performance management is supposed to drive engagement and foster a sense of accomplishment, which is something you've also kind of highlighted in one of your answers. Yet employees often view that systems are unfair or irrelevant. What are the psychological impacts of perceiving unfairness in performance management on employee engagement and organizational loyalty?
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, yeah, this is a good question, because I hate to over communicate the basics, but I'm going to in this point, is
We need to
that I
remind
think,
that.
yeah, it really comes back to this. I mean, it's becoming a seam line in this conversation here, is that we miss sight of the basics, and employees or colleagues feel that things are unfair because we're not focused on the relationship side of doing business. We're always focused on the outcomes. And
Mhm.
I think, especially in my expertise on driving leadership development or colleague development or organizational growth, uh, I'm hyper focused on the people side, those soft skills, because they really do, when you commit to those and focus on those drive the outcomes as an outpouring of that. It just
Mhm.
becomes natural, because if you trust you trust your colleague, you trust your leader, and you trust their intentions, then you will do good work in your organization.
Yep.
There's no qualms about that. But what ends up happening is there's two things that I think are factors that are prevalent here, is that leaders don't cultivate trust and curiosity in their engagements with their colleagues. They spend more time trying to figure out what people have accomplished instead of learning about the person, learning about what makes a person their authentic self, and create that acceptance. And when that exists, that acceptance, and people feel like they can trust their leader, no matter what the performance conversation yields, they're going to trust the intention because they know that that person cares about them. They've accepted who they are, and they're curious about them and want to engage with them. And I think that's number one. The second component is, I think that a lot of leaders tend to have a need to be a power play leader. And you
Mhm.
can see it
Yep.
on LinkedIn all the time. There's all this griping about bullying leadership.
Mhm.
But some
Yep.
leaders, I think, inherently may feel threatened by the skill sets some of their direct reports might have if they compete against their own, or maybe they don't have high EQ skills, emotional intelligence. And so they miss the opportunity to create, again, that relationship and comfort, where a person really feels like any kind of narrative they hear around performance can be trusted. And if the leader's threatened by that, then that diminishes that part of that relationship.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing those two different aspects. And I really like the terminology that you're utilizing, bully or the power play, as you were mentioning. I will highlight again to our audience to feel free to reach out to you if they'd like to learn a bit more in regards to these specific topics that we're discussing today. Her LinkedIn will be shared as well when sharing this video. So in regards to, we're coming down to the two last questions, but the fourth one being in regards to implementing effective changes, a better understanding what we could implement. Hopefully you can highlight a bit of points here, but considering the pitfall of traditional performance management systems, what innovative practices have you seen or would recommend that genuinely enhance performance and engagement across an organization?
Organization where I've implemented learning and development programs for leaders or colleagues throughout the organization, I again focus on the aspect of asking versus telling. So I
Mhm,
ask leaders or encourage leaders to focus on the coaching conversation, create consistent cadences in their engagements with their employees. And it doesn't have to be the same for everybody. You know, one person might want to meet 1 hour a month, another person might want to meet 15 minutes every week. But have consistent conversations where a person can create a narrative around what kind of work and contributions they're providing to the organization, and they can be heard by their leader. And so I encourage leaders to ask what and how kind of questions.
mhm.
So, and these are important. So, a lot of leaders want to tell people how to do things or give advice. People don't want that. They want to be engaged and create their narrative. We have a whole culture with Instagram and and on Facebook, whatever platform you want to use, on creating your story. And so that has to be extended into the workplace. Allow people to communicate their side, not be told. So three questions that I love to go to is the first is what kind of successes or accomplishments are you proud of this week? Leaders should encourage their colleagues to share that. And what ends up happening is you'll find out when you listen, if you're a good listener as a leader, you'll listen to what the person's contributing to the organization. That data will inform your performance narrative. You'll hear any barriers that might be coming up. You'll hear successes. You'll hear how they're engaging with other colleagues, and you'll be able to kind of note those successes. The second question that I think is important for a leader to ask is what's getting in the way for you? And this is a go-to question, whether I'm coaching a leader or coaching a colleague on a performance aspect, is what's getting in the way? And this question fosters trust, back to the earlier
Mhm.
question that we talked about. What's getting in the way creates space for the employee to share what's not going well, or maybe the failures that they might be encountering, and it creates trust. So when the
Great.
leader asks that question, the person feels like, oh, it's safe for me to share what I'm not doing well. And then it becomes a place where a leader can find out, hey, I can coach this person on this because this is getting in the way for them. So it gives them, informs the leader of how they can coach the person better. And I think the last question that I think is really important is the accountable factor for the leader is how can I support you right now? That's another good question I think it's important to ask. And the operative words or words in that sentence is right now. How can I support you right now? The way you show up to your colleagues as a leader or even as a colleague to colleague is asking, what do you need from me in this moment in time? That will ebb and flow throughout a person's development. And it will ask the leader to show up a different way. Sometimes people might need more time and attention if somebody's conquering a new task. Sometimes a person might need to just be heard. Sometimes people might need to be pointed to some key stakeholders to get information. But asking what kind of support you need right now from the leader's perspective is very empowering for employees to hear.
I love it, and it kind of breaks it down to engage in caring. We got the safe space, which is so important, and as well the leadership aspect that you mentioned as well in regards to being an actual leader, which is asking the right question in regard of how can I support you, as you mentioned. Really, really key pillars that you mentioned there, and I hope the audience is taking notes on that one as well. Finally, and the last question, I think if you haven't already realized, our dear audience, the extensive experience our special guest has today, but in regards to leadership and development, and let's bridge the gap between leadership development and performance management if it's not already pretty clear, let's be honest, in regards to why it's so important. But given your extensive background in creating scalable talent development and performance management solution. How do you see leadership development intersecting with performance management? Second question, excuse me. What strategies have you found effective in ensuring that leadership development initiatives support and enhance the effectiveness of performance management systems?
Well, sometimes leaders feel like they've gotten there because they
Yep.
got that promotion. They're a leader. I've got the skills, I've got everything under the belt that I need to be an effective leader. And I often remind leaders, you don't. I don't. I'm a news junkie. I listen to a lot of informational news because I'm always trying to teach myself something new. And I try to remind leaders that they have to learn something new each day. They have to learn something new about their leadership skills, and they also have to remind themselves around any blinders that they may have as far as biases that creep in. And what I mean by that is a lot of times leaders forget that they default to their natural style and they expect everybody that reports into them to demonstrate their same skill set like the preferred employee. Instead of realizing that everybody's unique, brings unique contribution skill sets and strengths to the organization and embraces those aspects of those individuals. So I always encourage leaders to check their blinders, their blind spots, and the ways I encourage them to do that is to look at new information. Try not to always read the journals, articles, and content that you like most. Read things that challenge your viewpoints, your opinions, so that you expand your mindset. When you expand your internal mindset, you're more apt to listen to different perspectives of the colleagues that report into you. You won't creep in that bias into the performance review process or coaching process when you're constantly growing and learning as a leader yourself. And I think is really important at the end of the day. And when a leader is constantly growing, they enrich those regular check-ins with trust, all the components we talked about, trust, listening, and acceptance. And that's what inspires people to contribute to an organization. That's what inspires a person to want to contribute and be engaged when they're working in a safe space and their leaders are curious about who they are and what they do and what their strengths are, most importantly.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so very much, Norma. And yeah, to our audience, if you'd like to learn a bit more, as mentioned before, feel free to reach out to Norma directly. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer any further questions you might have. But until the next time for another podcast, thank you very much to our special guest, Norma Herrington, but also to our audience for tuning in. Thank you very much. Take care. Ciao.
Thank you, Loic. Thank you.